Welcome back to the garage renovation. In the last episode, I ripped apart the rear wall of the garage immediately after saying that I was specifically trying to avoid ripping apart the rear wall. After putting the wall back together, I prepped the wall for paint and I am getting the first coat of paint on now. As was the case for the very first wall we painted, the bottom portion of this wall is also unpainted when we're starting, so we need to apply the initial sealing coat to that portion. The only challenging thing to notice when doing this is that because it's got a different amount of coverage from the rest of the wall, it's somewhat difficult to blend. At this point, there are two coats of paint that are on this wall. You can kind of see down here, it's still looking a little bit like there's some moisture sucked into those boards, which is why I pulled it off earlier, and it is actively raining out too. For that reason, I'm gonna have to wait till the coat's dry down there before I can recoat on that area. Everything else, though, is looking pretty good. Our next job is going to be move everything that's on this wall over to there. Once everything's moved over, we're going to finalize the painting portion on this wall as well, so everything matches throughout the room. That way I'm done with the paint while the weather is still warm enough for it to cure. After that's done, everything's good and dried, I'm going to start hanging everything back on the wall as far as shelving and get my storage situation a little more figured out. In one of the very first episodes, one of the things I said was to make sure you have everything that you possibly can get out of the space moved from the space. Obviously, I didn't do that well enough, and here I am yet again moving the same pile of things yet again. Even if they are items that you may want to store here at the end of the project, it's a good idea to move them out of the way, even if it's just for the length of time you're working in the space. However, I waited too long to do this, and now it's raining outside, so it's not an option for me at this point. So, learn from my mistakes. Continuing the trend of failing to learn from my own mistakes, you might recall how I said earlier on that you have to clean off everything prior to painting a wall. As you'll soon see me figure out, I obviously forgot to do that prior to painting this wall. Having now realized that I left a bunch of Velcro strips in the middle of where I'm trying to paint, I'll jump ahead to where I've actually removed them. At this point, I'm painting over the cutout in the wall that goes to the shelves in the dining room. As you'll see in a moment, the area above this cutout is very difficult to reach, in large part due to the hangers that are for the garage door. First, I'm going to have to remove the light cover so I can paint around it at the end of the garage, then I'll move back to that area. Ideally, we'd move the hanger out of the way, but because we're just looking to make it better than it was, doing it this way is sufficient. At this point, I've got two coats on the drywall wall. I got, I think, 3 or 4 coats on that back wall that I pulled the panel from, and then I touched up that back corner from the first wall that I hit. This is finally at the point that it's starting to resemble, at least from the wall perspective, what the room's gonna look like when it's done. Obviously, everything else is still in shambles. Two things to notice about the paint. One is I did not paint this little kickboard beneath the door because of all the wear it's gonna get walking in and out and potentially carrying things in and out of that door. I mean, you could see this door that was white when I started is now already a mess. Extrapolate that to something that's foot height and it's gonna be really bad if you paint it white. It's just gonna look dirty all the time. Other thing to notice is up over the top. I don't know if I can see that on the camera or not, but basically that whole area above this wall cutout, I did not bother doing multiple coats of paint for. If this was an inside space and it was a nice finished area that I was going for, that'd be one thing, but because this is only a garage, it's not really worth the level of effort to get that couple square feet when in general everything else is so much better than it was. With that, I am calling it quits for the night. When this is all dried, hopefully in the morning, I might do another coat depending on how well it's showing in daylight. Then if I do another coat, I will start hanging things up after it's dried. It is now the next day. It is about mid to high 50s out, so the temperature's been warm enough for the paint to appropriately cure, and now we have some daylight mixed in so we get a more accurate representation of how the coating actually looks. This wall is the only wall that was drywall, and it was already fairly white, but you can definitely see there's still some imperfections where they had things previously hung. It's a little difficult to tell on camera, but you know, a bunch of these little spots that you can see from whatever Velcro and adhesive they put on there before. To actually get all those covered up fully and to have it blend nicely with everything around it, that's probably gonna be another like 4 or 5 coats. At that point, it's not really worth the level of effort when I plan on hanging posters and stuff on the wall anyhow, and I'll probably just cover them up with that. Going back to this back wall that was behind the bench initially, where it was initially unpainted, you can still see a lot of the wood grain going through, and you have a clear defined line of where it was unpainted before versus the poorly painted portion at the top. looking at that and knowing that it's now a lot more dry than it was yesterday. Still rained earlier, so it's not perfectly dry. Relatively, it's more dry, so I'm gonna hit this bottom area one more time and try to get that to just match the upper sections more. My goal here is a pretty quick budget renovation, so getting it perfect throughout the whole thing I could do, but it's just not worth the level of effort versus the visual difference between how it looks now. At this point, this wall has been coated a final time. It's had a few hours to sit. I'm ready to rotate the bench back. Instead of disassembling the entire table to get these screws that were sticking out, what I did is I just took my grinding wheel and cut them off on the back side. That way I don't have to worry about them stabbing me and putting more holes in my sweatshirt. I'm gonna give this area a quick sweep to remove all the loose debris and dirt and junk that's underneath. Get those boxes out of the way, then shift this whole bench back. I will resume this after this is already rotated up against that back wall. It might have been hard to picture a few minutes ago, but now you can definitely picture the garage is starting to take its final form. Bench is rotated out, the bike is backed in. I kind of intend to keep it normally parked in this general area. Now the next step is think about what we're actually gonna need for storage, what is normally stored in here, and how am I gonna be using this space. The intention is assuming that I can ride the motorcycle more frequently next year. I'm gonna be coming in and out on this side, so I want to keep as little stuff on this side as possible. The trash can and the recycling can are next to the door just so it's easy enough to throw things out. That doesn't really block this drive-through area if I have a vehicle parked in here. The lawnmower itself I might actually have to take that and then rotate it over into that front corner. What I'm getting at here is that whatever your first initial setup is doesn't mean that's what it's gonna be forever. You can still move things around. I'm gonna get what I think is going to work in this setup, but then I'll probably have to adjust 2 or 3 things down the line to get something that's more livable and flows better from both the car standpoint and the tinkering with stuff standpoint. So with that stated, let's start getting things hung on the wall and getting this thing a little more wrapped up. I'm excited. We are finally hitting the closing stages of this project.